Hi, my name's Chad Kapper, and this is Building a Drone Brand. You clicked on this seminar because you're interested in starting a company, or you want to understand how to build a brand. And it doesn't matter whether it's a product, a service, or even a YouTube channel, or a personal persona brand, whatever it is. The way that I look at it is you're selling a product, whether it's a service or an entertainment or an actual physical product or a digital product. It doesn't matter. If you're doing some kind of customer or client interaction, I consider that a product. So even if your product is entertainment and you get paid through endorsements or advertisers, it's still a type of product. You're giving an audience or a customer or a client something, and you're getting something in return. Whether that's, like I said, sponsorships, you're getting subscribers, you're getting some kind of personal validation, you're getting money, you're getting whatever. You're exchanging something of value for something of value. And if you just break it down to those basic principles, a lot of this stuff will make sense, and you'll be able to understand how I work and what I've done in the past to be successful. If I were sitting in your seat, or if I was watching this, I would be like, well, why should I listen to you? And my filter for that is always to understand where someone has been, what they've accomplished. And if I value what they've accomplished, then I'm going to listen to what they say. I started out in corporate video. I did TV commercials and corporate presentations and, any type of video or animated kind of high-end presentation. And it was a lot of fun, but I got really sick of working with clients. They want to make some kind of presentation or sales video or commercial or something to push some product that I didn't care about. And it gets old. It gets really old because you pour your blood, sweat, and tears into this presentation, and you work on making it as creative and fun and interesting as possible. And then when it's all said and done, you just move on to the next thing, and that thing didn't even matter anymore. It burns you out after a while. I was doing it for 14 years before I ended up selling the company. But prior to selling the company, I started a brand called Flight Test. I fell in love with RC flight. It was something I wanted to do back in high school. I didn't have the time, money, resources, connections, whatever to get into it. So I just kind of backburnered it and got involved in life. And then once I got my business to a point where I could free up some time and do something different or, have some fun, I got into radio control flight, and more specifically FPV. And this was back in 2010 when it was a lot harder to get into it. I just took everything that I wish my clients would have done, and I just did it myself. And I thought, rather than selling somebody else's product or brand, I want to create a brand that I feel is worthwhile and that people would actually care about. And very early on, I remember sketching up ideas for the logo, thinking, well, what do I want this brand to be? What do I want it to be about? And I thought, I think the number one issue I had with most of the projects that I worked on and a lot of my clients was trust. I felt like I couldn't even trust them, let alone get an audience to trust them. I would prefer to build a brand that is built around that trust. And I thought, okay, so I'm going to take this thing that I'm enamored with, RC flight. I'm going to take the pieces I felt were missing from my past. And I'm going to take the skills and abilities I've learned over it was actually over 14 years because I'd worked for another company prior. And I'm going to combine all that into just my perfect basket of stuff. And that became Flight Test. And what I remember thinking very early on, before we ever did an episode, before the logo was even done, I thought it needs to be about something. And I thought, I want to provide information and inspiration and excitement for people in a way that they can move forward and advance, whether it's through inspiration, entertainment, education. And I want to be able to provide that stuff for free. So if we were providing a product, I thought, well, we'll have the advertisers or sponsors pay for it and let the people get all of this stuff for free. I like that model. It doesn't rely on grants or the government or whatever. You just build a business that makes money where people like me got to benefit. And, in my case, when I got into the hobby, I could afford it. I had expendable income by that point, but I waited so long to get into this hobby that I love so dearly because I couldn't afford it. And I didn't know how. So I thought, I'm just going to break down those walls and those barriers for anyone else that wants to. And that was the purpose of Flight Test. So when I got to the point where I had to come up with a mission statement, I thought, I want Flight Test to be the most trusted brand in RC flight. And that's what I started with. And anytime I went down the road and I had to make decisions, I came back to that and I thought, how does this apply to that mission? Are we inspiring people? Are we educating? And do they trust that? And that was my mantra. And that's what I always went back to. So as I go through the different steps and different things to build a brand, I want you to keep that in mind because that's at the core of all of this. And when you think about, what you want to create, you always have to go back to those core values, that core mission, that vision that you initially had that got you excited about moving forward. And you really got to dig down and you got to be honest with yourself. What do you want out of this? If you're building a brand, don't do it just to do it because it's fun. It still has to have purpose. So Flight Test was the first real independent brand that I created with the intent of creating a brand. My production company was really created more out of necessity. It was because I was very passionate and interested and excited about video production and 3D animation. But Flight Test was more intentional. It was more about what can I create with all the stuff that I've learned and all the mistakes that I've made. And as some of you might know, Flight Test was not the only brand that I created. I've created a number of brands since then. Also, I've helped other drone companies build up and refine their brands. I've even helped some companies completely overhaul their whole brand and the brand position. All right, now it's time to get into the meat of it. Now, I've put a lot of thought into this. When Randy asked me to do this for the Drone Film Festival, I let him pick the topic. He said, how about building a drone brand? And I thought, okay, that's very hyper specific. But the more I thought about it, I thought, these principles carry over no matter what. Now, I have specifically a lot of experience building drone brands. However, I really do think these principles carry over. So no matter what kind of brand you are building, I believe this will be helpful. What I've noticed, brands fail because of these three areas. They don't have a goal, they get distracted, and they quit when it gets hard. I may have oversimplified that, but I don't think so. I think that really is the biggest hurdles. And I thought, okay, well, how do you address these? Because I don't like to tell people what not to do, because if you say, don't do that, it's not super helpful because there's a billion other things you could do. But if you say, do this, well, then it's very specific. It's very clear. So if we address those three areas, design your goal, focus your energy, and never give up. And that's a way to focus on the positive aspect of those three areas of difficulty rather than trying to stay away from them. So we're going to really try to focus in on these three phases: designing your goal, focusing your energy, and never give up. And what do these three segments mean to me? So first, let's cover designing your goal. You have to have some kind of foundation, a goal to look towards. A lot of people call it vision. There's all these buzzwords like vision, mission, values. It's not so important that you have it structured exactly the way that everyone else does. What's important is that you do have a vision. Typically, I like to start with a mission statement that is a, what, when, who, how kind of thing, where it describes what you're doing, who it's for, and how you're going to get there. I can assure you that having any kind of foundational focus and something that you build the rest of your brand on is important. It doesn't matter what you call it. It just matters that there's something there. If it's empty and if you're just chasing an idea or chasing money or some kind of opportunity or fame or whatever, you're never really going to get there because you don't know why. You have to know why you're doing what you're doing to be more effective. The very first thing you've got to know is what's your goal? Like, what do you want to accomplish? Everything that you do should have some type of goal. Otherwise, you're just floating around doing stuff for no purpose. So even this presentation has a goal. The goal is that you walk away with something valuable that you can implement into your life and what you're doing and in your business. And if someday you come back to me and say, hey, Chad, those few points you made, struck home with me and actually made a lot of sense and I implemented it and it worked. There's nothing better for me than to hear that from somebody. Unfortunately, I won't know if this goal is met for probably many months or years down the road, but either way, I'm going to keep trying. Identifying and defining your goal is very important. So let's just say you're going to start a drone company that does real estate videos. You got to understand, how do you fulfill that goal? So if you buy a drone and you get a client, have you fulfilled that goal? Is that what you're going for? Is that what you want to do? If yes, then great. Then just formalize it. Write that down on paper. Put it someplace that helps you remember what that goal is and what you want to accomplish. So I think it's important that you have some kind of mission statement. Again, it doesn't have to be constructed perfectly, but you want to have something that keeps you on track. So the way I look at it is your mission statement is, what you're doing, who you're doing it for, and how you're going to get there. Your values are kind of like your ethical or moral guardrails. As the founder of a company or the one that starts a business, it starts with you, and you are the one that needs to understand what your values are. I know that sounds kind of, obvious, but believe me, not a lot of people know what their values are because they don't really think about it. They just live by it. So you got to take some time to identify what values of yours you're instilling into your brand. And how is that message conveyed? These are things to think about. They're not absolute essentials, but you shouldn't just skim over it all and take it for granted. Okay, so to pull up a couple examples, let's start with eBay. Their mission statement is, at eBay, our mission is to provide a global online marketplace where practically anyone can trade practically anything, enabling economic opportunity around the world. So what is it they're trying to do? They're trying to enable economic opportunity around the world for anyone. That's pretty broad. Even though it obviously is working for them, I would recommend focusing and down to a little more specific. Everybody tries to say everyone, but very few can actually serve everyone. I would start with a more selective crowd with your brand. And then, in the future, you want to expand it, you can always expand. So what are they providing? They're providing a global online marketplace. So they have the who, how, what they're doing in their mission statement. Let's see. So Nest, they make thermostats and cameras. Our mission is to create a more helpful home, continuing to build devices and services that allow your home to take care of the people inside it and the world around it. And in doing so, we'll continue to live by the same core privacy and security principles that guide all of Google's work today. So recently, Google just acquired Nest, so that is a more recent mission statement that obviously incorporates. It's kind of funny. They have the same core privacy and security principles. They got to make sure they put that in there because people are very concerned about their privacy and their information getting shared. So they went ahead and put it in their mission statement. And there's even a link there that takes you to the privacy and security principles. So you can see a mission statement is something that you create so you can maintain focus. And it's not just you. I mean, obviously you're going to remember where you want to take your business, but your customers, your employees, your vendors, everybody stands to do a better job working together if they all are on the same page and they understand what you're trying to do. I would say the very first thing that you want to do with your brand is flesh out your mission statement. What is it you're trying to do? Who are you trying to do it for? And for what purpose? Now, your values are a supporting element of that. I typically like to encourage people to start with like 3 primary values. Like what are the 3 things that are most important to what you're doing? For instance, at Flight Test, we always had entertaining, educating, and elevating the world of RC flight. So the idea in elevating was another E word because I wanted 3 E's, but it's a word for inspiration. So we wanted to entertain, educate, and inspire people. We use that as a filter for everything. So any idea that we came up with, we would run it through that filter. We would say, does this entertain? Does it educate? And does it inspire? And it didn't have to have an equal amount of all 3 of those elements, those values, but it did have to touch on them. It did have to filter through them in some way. And that kept us on track. It really helps a lot. Additionally, as part of your foundation, you need to make sure that you have good quality, strong brand assets. That means your logo, your tagline, your supporting elements that are visual and conceptual as far as the brand persona itself. I know that it might sound kind of superficial, but having an icon or a logo that really represents the concept of your company and the persona is really important. It becomes a rally point for people to envision and kind of think of when they think of your company. Rotor Riot is one of the strongest iconic type brands that I've ever created or been involved in. The logo is really strong and it has meaning behind it. So good brand assets are very important. You got to focus. It's very easy to get distracted. You wouldn't believe how many entrepreneurs and small business owners really lose focus. They get distracted. Something else looks like a better opportunity. It looks like the market's changing. That's a big one. A lot of times we will fool ourselves into saying that the market is changing or there's a downturn or there's a recession or whatever. That's fine. All that stuff can be real, but it doesn't mean you change your focus, like your end goal. Your methodology might change, your offering might change, but you can't change your entire focus. You have to be able to make sure that you keep that end goal in mind and that everything that you're doing is supporting that goal and helping getting you there closer. Right now, I'm going through my 3rd recession in business. I started my first business back in 1998. We had, after 9/11, and then we had, around the late 2000s, and now, the whole COVID thing and all of that. So you can make it through recessions. You just have to, you don't change your goal though. You just change your methodology or something to better serve your audience. You gotta focus your energy. In order to do that, there's these 3 basic operating principles that I'd like to go over. It's not hard to think of them. It's not hard to understand them. When I go over them here, it's gonna be like a kind of a no-brainer, but it is hard to be consistent with them. It's hard to implement them every day. And what it is you need to make sure you remind yourself of that goal. Focus on the goal. Always bring the goal back up. If the goal changes, then everything else is going to change. So try to remember what your goal is. And I know it sounds obvious, but trust me, it's not. People get distracted very easily. So focus on the goal. 2, you need to measure objectively. This means do not run your company by your gut. Your feelings are a great indicator of something, like something might be off or something might be up and you can't quite figure it out, but do not react to those feelings. Measure objectively. If you have a retail store or an online e-commerce store, then one of your metrics is going to be your revenue, your sales. So look at that and use that to objectively tell how you're doing. Look at your metrics, look at your numbers, your conversion rate, how much traffic you're getting. These are things that are objective. It's not based on your gut and your feelings. Your gut and your feelings, they are there for a reason, but they're not always accurate. So make sure that you measure objectively. And then 3, you want to serve your customer. I know these sound really obvious, but really, I don't think business and branding is that hard. It's just hard to stay on track. It's hard to stay consistent and stay focused. So make sure you're serving your customer. Whatever it is you're doing, whether it's a service base, a product, entertainment, make sure you're giving them what you've promised. Are you making a product? Well, then make sure that product does what it's supposed to do. Make sure that your service is delivering to the level that you sold to the client. These are really 3 operational principles that I think you should think about upfront. How do you incorporate that into your brand? Obviously, you don't go advertise it, but how does your brand support that as well? And how does that support your brand? It's something you really want to think about. The third area where I see brands fail is people give up. There's a lot of reasons and excuses, and people can say we ran out of money, we did this, this happened, or we didn't see this recession coming, or whatever. The bottom line is, if you don't give up, you don't lose. But there's infinite reasons as to why someone will give up. Now, obviously, everybody has a limit, but I would say that most people quit long before they've really hit their limits. In reality, what happened is it became harder than they expected. Don't give up. I don't have a particular talent as far as like a creative skill or whatever. I might be okay or average at a lot of different skills, but my particular talent, I would say, is persistence or tenacity. The fact that I won't give up, the fact that I'll just keep moving forward. I think that's probably my greatest strength, and the rest will come. You can find people to work with, you can figure things out, but I think most importantly is don't give up, because if you give up, you lose. If you lose, you're done. So the best way to get a brand to thrive and do well is incorporate that mentality into the brand itself. How do you do that? Don't let yourself speak in a way that lets giving up be an option. For instance, if you're talking to a colleague and you're saying something along the lines, well, if we make it through this, don't ever talk like that. As soon as you add that if to any of your materials or your speech or anything that you're doing, you've introduced that as a possibility. So if you don't allow that to be a possibility, it won't be a possibility. I know that sounds, again, kind of oversimplified, but I think a lot of things can be simplified if you don't get wrapped up in all the details and making excuses. The bottom line is, if you refuse to quit, that's your decision. Unless somebody actually handcuffs you and puts you in a basement and you have no contact with the outside world, you can keep going. There are always setbacks. There are always problems, issues that are going to arise. What do you do? How do you not give up? Well, you can adjust. And how do you adjust? You adjust by refocusing on the goal, yet again, because you probably have lost sight of it. You get distracted by other things or worried and you're not sure what to do. So you got to refocus on that goal. And then you got to understand what the current state of things are. Like what's happening right now. I think right now, I had an interesting conversation with my wife the other day. I was talking about how during this whole pandemic, some restaurants have just quadrupled their business and a lot of them are going out of business. So how is that it's so polarized? Because they're not all the same type of business. You could say, well, that's a sit-down restaurant, that's a fast food restaurant, that's a delivery business. Well, what I saw was a lot of restaurants that maybe, predominantly were, sit-down, nicer restaurants adjusted their model. They quickly adapted their menu to accommodate takeout and carry out, and they limited the selection to the items they knew that were most popular. And then they start to thrive. And then what happens is the sooner that you do that, the sooner you capture a larger market share. So if somebody else figures that out, but it's a month later, now they're already behind the 8 ball. So when you are thrown a curveball, I think it's really important that you stay nimble, that you understand, how do we adjust to this changing atmosphere? How do we adjust to this hurdle that was just thrown in our way? It's always possible. That's the one thing that I know for certain. So while it's really important to be able to pivot and to adjust, you still don't want to lose sight of that original goal. You want to keep your mission and your values in mind. I think that's really one of the most important things is when you lay that foundation, constantly remind yourself, remind your employees, remind your customers. And the best way to remind them is to live it, is to do it, and to find a way to incorporate these things into your collateral, all your assets, your website, all of your written material. And if you do any interviews, if you talk to people, it's really important to echo all of your foundation through everything that you do. All right, so what I would like to do is I want to wrap this up with a really clear statement that in business, stagnation is death. You are either living or you're dying. There is no in between. You don't just like hang out and cruise through life. You can't do that in a business either. A business it's fast paced, it's always moving, and you're either thriving or dying. Not a lot of room in between. And if you're dying, you better be working on a plan to get back on track. And if you're thriving, you better work on a plan to stay there. But it's inevitable. You're not going to stay there forever. So what are you going to do? And how are you going to handle it when you get there? Okay, you'll notice I'm wearing a different outfit. That's because I watched what I shot and I'm adding to it. So there's some basics that I thought it would be nice to just run through and give you more of my thought process on building a brand rather than just kind of the high level, 3 areas. The first thing that I like to think about is whatever that brand is, what can it be the best in the world at? Like how can that brand in what it does be the best in the world? Now, obviously, that's a tall order. It's pretty lofty to think that you can be the best in the world at anything. That's a really big thing. But there's nothing wrong with thinking like that. With Rotor Riot, I believe we've represented the best pilots in the world. So I think it's completely achievable. You just have to have enough qualifiers to make it realistic for your resources and your abilities. What it forces you to do is to really get into your zone and be the best you can be in that zone. And it forces you to identify it. So when you say that, you believe it and you believe that you can achieve it. So I like to start with what can you be the best in the world at? I guess next I would say this is absolutely necessary and don't ever skip this over because it's super important. Understand your customer. I mean, really understand your customer. Do not make up your customer in your head. Do not think about, oh, my customer is, everyone. No, you can work your way up to everyone, but you got to start with a customer that you can actually visualize buying your product or service or watching your show or whatever that person is. So that's really important that you identify and understand your customer. Without understanding who you're selling to and what you're selling them, it doesn't do you any good. You will waste a lot of time and have a lot of frustration if you don't understand your customer. Or something else I want to talk about is study the competition. Understand, and I've noticed a lot of people starting a new brand, they're so excited about being unique and original, they don't want to look at the competition. They don't want to feel like they're copying somebody, or I think worse yet, I think a lot of people are afraid that if they study their competition and their competition has a similar idea that now they can't do it or something, or they get deflated, or they just want to pretend that it doesn't exist. I don't know, but it's best to get all the dust out of the corners. Like poke all the holes you possibly can in your brand. That's the best thing you can do because it only makes it better. So study your competition, really understand who they are. And this also, by looking at your competition, look at their customers. This helps you understand who your customers are. Or it might help you understand who you don't want them to be, and you want to, pivot your idea a little bit and get into a more, or I guess a better fit. So moving on from there, I would say the next level of importance is a financial plan. It's boring. It's tedious. It's very difficult. At times it feels impossible. But for Rotor Riot, for instance, one of the things that I did was I came up with a financial plan for our retail store. And I sat down, both a timeline. It was I think at the time I'm trying to remember if I did a 9-month timeline for the retail store because I wanted to line it up with the end of the year. And I sat down and I put in a spreadsheet all of the products I thought we might sell. I mean, it wasn't super comprehensive, but it was pretty detailed. I mean, everything from hats to motors, flight controllers. I made a list of every product that I was pretty certain we were going to sell. And then I went month by month, week by week, and tried to imagine how many of each item we would sell. And I was able to come up with a realistic game plan of what we would sell each month, for the next 9 months, coming up with a projection. And then what's nice about that is, one, you do like an exponential curve. You obviously can't start out selling. Set in place financial goals that are achievable, because if you just try to do these lofty financial goals and you don't hit your goals, it's very demotivating. And people lose steam, your employees lose steam if you have employees by that point, but even if you don't, it's very disheartening to not hit your goals. So really try to do achievable goals. And what that does is, let's just say week 1, you hit your goal. Now it frees up your mind. You're not thinking about sales every minute of every day. It's you say, okay, I hit my goal this week. Now I can shift gears and I can think about my marketing plan or, other things rather than just hitting those financial goals. But having the financial plan is very important and helps keep you on track. And I would not let that slide. You should sell a product or a service that there's a need for. So it could be a common thing. Like in Rotor Riot's case, we were selling parts that already existed and other people were selling. But we had a unique position. Our position was we represented the best pilots, the freestyle pilots in the world, and they were recommending which parts to buy and which parts to use based on their abilities. And that gave us a very unique position that other brands had, but because we represented the best in freestyle, then we had the best recommendations. And that's what I mean by unique position. So even though we're selling the same products everybody else is selling, we're selling combinations that are selected by the best pilots in the world. And that's a unique position. So think about how that can apply to your brand. I typically do not like big launches. I think it puts a lot of pressure on you as a founder, puts a lot of pressure on your team. Unless you're well experienced in launching brands and you know exactly what you're doing and your market and you've really got all of this stuff figured out, I recommend doing what's called a soft launch. And that means rolling things out slowly, knowing that you're probably going to have to shift or redo them or re-engineer your thought process. And you might have to, let's just say you roll out an e-commerce store and it's missing the mark and you've got no sales, you're not converting, and you have to make some changes. Well, then that's okay. You pull back, you do some changes, and you launch again. But if you do like this grandiose launch and you're building everything up and it misses the mark, you've wasted a lot of what I call brand collateral, where people were counting on you to have something really exciting, and if it didn't live up to that, you don't really get a second chance. But if you do a soft launch and you're kind of introducing things more slowly and you see what's catching hold and what's not, you can keep focusing on those areas that are gaining traction. And that's the power of a soft launch. It's not as exciting, but it is it's more realistic, and it gives you a lot more wiggle room to make mistakes. After you launch, get lots of feedback. Don't ignore the hurtful feedback. Like the stuff that hurts the most is probably the most valuable. It doesn't mean that you take it to heart. Don't take feedback personally. Feedback is just, it's feedback. It's customers or clients giving you, or it could just be general random people. That's probably the biggest dividing line though. Listen to people that have purchased your product. Listen to them deeply and try to understand what they're saying. If it's a random person that's never purchased anything from you and probably never will, I wouldn't put a lot of stock in what they're saying, because sometimes people are just jealous or they don't like your brand or whatever, and you may or may not win them over, but you don't have necessarily the capacity in the beginning to just filter through every piece of feedback. So I'm just saying, pay attention to the people that have actually given you business and listen to them. Let them vote with their dollars. See how they're spending their money with you, and it matters. So listen to the people that do business with you. And then, of course, refining your offering. Once you get that feedback, make the adjustments. One thing I've noticed, I've worked with a lot of people in e-commerce, and one thing I've noticed is they tend to like to push the products that they like or the products they think should sell, but without looking at the data to really back it up. So, for instance, I have a friend of mine who makes unique items by hand, and some of these items, it takes him, a week to make, and some of them take half a day to make. And you got to look at it. And the very first thing we did was we looked at what he sold, and we looked at the time put into each item, and then we broke that down into essentially an hourly rate. So if this item, if he sold this one particular item for $100 and it took him 2 hours to make, but he had this other item he would sell for $500, but it took him 40 hours to make. The $500 item sounds like a lot of money, but he's not making as much money on it because it's per hour. He's losing money at that point, depending on the product. But you got to look at your products that way. Look at your more profitable items. And if you have a high profit item that is also selling well, you need to give that a lot of attention. Even in a service-based business, you need to pay attention to the services that you offer that are maybe high maintenance or very expensive to provide or very timely or time consuming. You just need to make sure you pay attention to that stuff. It doesn't mean, sometimes you need to offer something that you don't make much profit on, but helps round out your offering, helps round out the selection of what you sell. And that's a good thing. You always want to serve your customer. You always want to make sure that they have everything that they need. And, really bend over backwards to serve that customer. That's why you're there. You're in business to serve your customers, to serve your clients, and you got to put that effort into it. So I realize some of you may have clicked on this expecting to see how to make great logos or something like that. While your brand image is very important, I decided to focus on what I felt were the most impactful, the most effective elements of building a brand. And really, it comes down to the foundation. You need, just to recap and summarize, you need to understand those core values and the goal that you're trying to achieve, and you need to stay focused on that, and you need to never give up. And it really is that simplistic of a design, but to execute it is extremely difficult. And I see people, get distracted and quit all the time. So before you even pull the trigger, just take my word for it. It's going to be 10 times harder than you think it is. It always is. It's going to be harder. It's going to take longer. It's going to cost more. It always does. So if you can design a goal and a mission that you believe in, that you're not going to give up on, and you can just continually refocus your efforts towards that goal, then you will achieve it. Now, obviously, you need to design a goal that is within the realm of reality. I mean, if you want to go to the moon and you have no special skills, talents, resources, investment to get there, then obviously that's going to be a waste of your time. But if you design a reasonable goal that you have something to contribute towards it, and you don't give up and you keep pressing forward, you will get there. And I think that really is the most important essence of a brand, is designing what you want to do, keeping focused on it, and then never giving up. So I want to thank you for listening. I hope this has been helpful. So thanks again, and have a great day.